So this is ICUJP. I'm Steve Rohde. I'm facilitating the meeting today, and I'm chair of this wonderful organization. We have been meeting for 22 years by the Reverend George Regas of beloved memory. George literally convened us to address what he feared would come after 9/11, and he was prescient on that as he has been on so many other things. So we got together. I was recently, I'll use this as an opportunity to tell you that Rebecca Arvizu, right here on the screen, has joined the board of directors
Yay!
of our
Thank you.
group. We're thrilled to have her. She has a terrific background both in nonprofit governance and in social justice. That's a powerful combination. And we had a one-on-one orientation last week, and I told her the story of ICUJP. George convened us. I think Ignacio was there and others that we're seeing on this screen. And we literally on a blackboard named our group. Every word meant something. Interfaith communities. We didn't just want a top-down group of clergy meeting. We wanted interfaith communities meeting. Interfaith communities united. We wanted to come together. And what were we coming together for? Justice and peace. So this somewhat cumbersome name, Interfaith Communities United for Justice and Peace. It meant something then, it means something today. We've put on over 1,000 webinars every Friday for 22 years with a few days off for holidays, under the motto that religious communities must stop blessing war and violence. We didn't know if we'd have to exist for over 20 years. I guess in some sense, we'll exist as long as we can because the struggle for justice and peace goes on. And it has ever new demands on our time and our effort. I will use that hook to say that we depend on the generosity of friends and new friends. Anything you can contribute to our work helps us pay our small budget and small part-time staff, which includes the wonderful Rick Banales. You can go on the donation link in the invitation you got for today. Make for what is for you a significant contribution. We know you have many demands on your resources and your time, but if you've learned something at these ICUJP programs, if you've been moved by them, if you've been inspired, please make as generous a contribution as you can. I'm going to turn to our honored, respected, loved speaker. Darrel Meyers has attracted one of the largest audiences at ICUJP in recent months. Everyone here is a FOD, a friend of Darrel. He will tell you a little bit more about himself and the spiritual journey that has brought him to this work. In introducing him, I just want to say that every time Darrel Meyers walks in a room or onto a Zoom screen, I get a smile on my face. Every time he walked into the room when ICUJP before COVID was meeting face to face, he always had a good word for everyone as he circulated through the room. He made you feel better. He made you feel hopeful. He was serious and committed and dedicated, but he lives his life with joy. and it is what has attracted so many of us to him. Darrel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Steve. As the moment I get up off the floor, I'll speak. Wow. Thank you so much. And good to be with everyone here. As I mentioned before, I've been in Southern California all my life since I was 5, and except for 3 years back in New Jersey, and have been involved with ICUJP almost from its beginning. And I so appreciated Steve Rohde over the years. And let me say, too, that I want to send out a special thanks to Dick Bunce. I may have mentioned it before, but Dick Bunce opened wider my world. I remember he came to speak at some event at my church when I was pastoring out in Simi Valley. And he was telling us about his experiences in the social justice issues. And I really marked that time, especially among one or two others, that really widened my perspective and deepened it, and sort of made me remember Jesus saying in the Sermon on the Mount, "Come in through the narrow gate, but it's going to get wider, it's going to get deeper." And so you see more and more. And along with that, I just want to say hi to Louis Watanabe. I don't think we've really met, but my greatest experience in church ministry was as an interim pastor for 39 months of a Japanese American Presbyterian church down in Long Beach, the Grace Presbyterian Church, and meeting several other fellow Japanese American pastors in the area over those years. Those were my sweetest memories as a pastor of a church. I really appreciate ICUJP and the critical topic that we're talking about today, especially the work of FOSNA, F-O-S-N-A. It's also, I mentioned the word secular because secular is what I think God sends us into, the secular world. Many Christians like to just aim for heaven, period. And we're to be involved in the secular, because in this very sense, Jesus was among the secular people, eating and dining with the not wannabes or not to the excluded and so forth. And here at ICUJP, I really appreciate this critical topic because we've had other speakers on this. My dear friend Don Wagner, whom Vicki knows well too, spoke to us some years ago, and also Jonathan Katab, the Palestinian and American now attorney, whom I'll say a word about more later, and also Munther Isaac, who is the pastor of the Christmas Lutheran Church in Bethlehem, and he spoke to us one time not too long ago, and he's also working at the event called Christ at the Checkpoint. And I'll say a word about his Christmas Eve sermon that you may have heard about. It was noted globally this last December. It was called Christ Under the Rubble. And it got a whole lot of attention because that's what's happening in Gaza today. And I think of Gaza as such a horrifically treated place today. The world's first live-streamed genocide. Friends of Sabeel, of which, Friends of Sabeel, then there are several chapters of Friends of Sabeel internationally, as in Europe mostly. But what is Sabeel? What is Sabeel that we're friends of? Sabeel seeks to be a Christian voice for Palestine. Those in the occupied territories of the West Bank and East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. And with those in Israel itself, of which 20% of that population are Palestinians, and for those in the Palestinian diaspora, seeks to be a Christian voice. Yeah, I had a very interesting time in 1977 in New York City at the Union Theological Seminary. I had a study leave there for about a week or two, staying at the YMCA down the street, which is another experience. But and this was a conference on liberation theology. And we had all kinds of speakers on the Black liberation theology, on Hispanic, on Native American, on women's liberation theology. We had Gustavo Gutierrez, the father of Latin liberation theology. What a wonderful time. At the end of our sessions, at the end, I went to the office of the one who put it together, a professor named Robert McAfee Brown, who had written a very interesting and readable book years before called The Bible Speaks to You. And I asked him, Dr. Brown, is anybody doing Palestinian liberation theology? He said, well, I don't know. Maybe somebody across the street. He was referring to the Hebrew Seminary. And I said, well, if I can get somebody to come and speak with you, I had somebody very definitely in mind, would you be interested? Well, he just wasn't interested at that time. And I'm not sure even afterwards. I had in mind Fayez Sayegh, who was a Palestinian liberation Christian, who was the leading attorney, a leading human rights person at the United Nations, who was an amazing person. His wife, who lived here in Southern California, just died just a few years ago. It was wonderful to meet with her. I could say a lot more about that. But this question of Palestinian liberation theology is something that got Sabeel organized in Jerusalem. Now, Sabeel, what does it mean? It's an Arabic word. It's got two meanings. It could mean a stream of water, where in Palestine, water can be ample, but usually shut off to most Palestinians. And it also means the way, which is quite a biblical term as well. People of the way is what Christians were first called before they were called Christians. So Sabeel has had a number of things happening, including international conferences. Their first conference, which I attended, was in the YMCA in East Jerusalem. And it was called The Significance of Jerusalem for Christians and Christians for Jerusalem. This is significant because not only are Christians, but Muslims being shut out more and more from Jerusalem, especially East Jerusalem. Then in 2004, it met at Notre Dame Cathedral there in East Jerusalem, and the topic was challenging Christian Zionism. Christian Zionism is a form or distortion, many of us understand, as a understanding the Bible, and it is very problematic, to say the least. I could say more about that later. Another conference among about the 8 or 10 that have been held was in 2011, and it was on challenging empire. What does it mean to be living in empire? I think we in the United States have some understanding about that, especially in these last days here. And challenging empire. And then a more recent one was the Bible and the Palestine-Israel conflict, how the Bible is misused to justify injustice. And that's going on. And I think that's going to be somewhat the topic of the next international conference, which usually draws 300 or 400 people to East Jerusalem or to Nazareth or to Bethlehem or to Ramallah. And this is going to be on Christian Zionism too, I believe. Now, Sabeel also has a Tuesday morning event at 8 o'clock for an hour. It's called Kumi Now, Kumi. And they have programs on discrimination of women's rights, the settlements issue, which the rabbis for human rights are going to be speaking, who are supportive of Palestinian human rights there, and the question of Armenian Christian community and their human rights, because the Armenian Christian community in the old city is in threat of losing a lot of its property to settlers and to those who want to eventually, I think, bring it to extinction. And then on Thursday, every 8 o'clock on Thursdays, there's the prayer and Bibles study and discussion with people there, including some of the leading Palestinian ladies there as well. Well, that's Sabeel. And what does Kumi now mean, I might say? Kumi is the Arabic word for get up. Like Jesus said to the daughter that was supposed to be dead, Kumi now, Kumi, rise up. And so Sabeel sees its role as to help people to rise up peacefully and prophetically and purposely. Well, getting back to Friends of Sabeel, we try to promote the vision of what Sabeel in Jerusalem is doing. And we have various chapters around the world, as I may have mentioned. Our values and our voice is that we believe active engagement with the world as an integral element of faith. We recognize theology as, or at least can be, a liberating force. We're building a base of active support for Palestinian freedom in the U.S. churches. And that's been a hard struggle sometimes, because many churches don't want to have to deal with this. But some of the denominations have spoken out very strongly, among which is my own, as well as the somewhat the Episcopal Church and the Methodist Church and the United Church of Christ and so forth. And that can cost a congregation, that can cost a denomination some people who don't like it. We value intergenerational leadership, because they're not all the old guys like myself, but a lot of younger people are coming in to the leadership role. And we are accountable, and we're led by the Palestinian community in Palestine and its diaspora. And we see the connection between the struggles and work that are a part of our work, as also engaged with other struggles and movements for liberation. For example, Black Lives Matter, among others. FOSNA, Friends of Sabeel North America, promotes the vision of Sabeel Jerusalem then, and joining chapters around the world. Our values, our voice are something like this. We believe in active engagement with the world is to be an integral element of faith. We recognize theology as a liberating force, or at least it can be. We are building a base of active supports for Palestinian freedom in the United States churches. That's very key. And one of the great laments right now among people in Palestine, including in Gaza, is, where is the voice of the church? I mean, this is almost like something that happened in the late 30s and 40s, although not on that horrific scale, but perhaps not very far. So let me go on from there. We support the call of Kairos Palestine. Now, Kairos Palestine was issued in 2009, I believe, by the Palestinian Christians themselves. Kairos Palestine is a moment of truth, and it's a marvelous booklet if you don't have it. We've been trying to promoted, as it were, over the last decade or so. It's a very reasoned statement about what Christians in Palestine want and need, and a call for support and action. We support an end to the Israeli occupation of Palestine in accordance with international law. Hello? And UN resolutions. Hello? We support equal rights and access to resources, such as land. More and more lands are being taken in the West Bank. I don't know if you've been following this. Olive trees are being cut down by the hundreds of thousands over the years. Olives are the key ingredient almost for Palestinian cuisine. The resource to water. Palestinians get almost 90% of their water taken from them. Sometimes there's not easily gotten a glass of water. I was in a home in Jerusalem some years ago and had to find the right time that the shower might be working. This meant we believe these resources are meant for the inhabitants of the region. They're based on principles of social and economic and political justice. FOSNA supports the right of return for all Palestinian refugees, those who are kicked out of their homes in late 47 and 48, maybe 67 as well. They have a right according to UN Resolution 194, but how much of the UN resolutions are they being observed? We support an end to the US policies that support and perpetuate this occupation. It is a brutal occupation. We support an active engagement in the campaign for boycott, divestment, and sanctions, BDS movement. I remember back in 30 years ago, when this was called for South Africa, boy, people didn't like it. I remember even mentioning it in a sermon somewhere else, I think in Bellflower or somewhere. And there were some Indonesian people there who did not like that. And then afterwards we got to talking about it and they began to see it. But the African call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions was a leading force to help gain freedom for African Blacks. And many of them understand what's going on, of course, in Palestine. And by the way, Bishop Tutu and also Alan Busak, a good friend, in fact, from the 80s, have said that in going to Palestine, the apartheid there is worse than it was in South Africa. So we endorse boycott, divestment, and sanctions. But we also oppose two things. FOSNA opposes the distortion of the Bible and theologies that lead to violence and prejudice. And we oppose all forms of racism, including anti-Semitism and anti-Arabism and anti-Muslim bigotry. Well, FOSNA has a staff internationally or nationally, and as well as in Canada, and also trustees and advisory board. Our executive director is Jonathan Katab. Jonathan, for years, has been a notable Palestinian lawyer, often in the Israeli courts, a very confirmed Christian person, and he was also a speaker here, as I mentioned before, once at ICUJP. Jonathan Katab is a co-founder of Sabeel in Jerusalem. He is the co-founder also of the Palestinian human rights group called El Haq, H-A-Q, meaning law. And he's also the co-founder of Nonviolent International and has written several books most recently. On our advisory board, we have a dear friend, Leila El-Mariati, who has been the head here of Kinder USA, that operates in Gaza Strip, and I know her heart. I talked with her a few weeks ago. Already about 50 members of her family, extended family, had been killed in Gaza.
Over 65 last I heard.
Yeah, I'm sure it is now. She's the daughter of Dr. Sabri Al-Farah, who's also a dear friend. He was sort of the leader of the Palestinian community in Southern California and was head, a doctor or surgeon, I guess, at either the NBC or the CBS studios in Hollywood. He was also my doctor for several years. So on that board is Leila Al-Mariati, Mubarak Awad, a psychologist and a director of Nonviolence International. Cornel West, whom many of you know is running for president. Rashid Khalidi, a leading professor on this issue at Columbia University, and Mark Braverman, an amazing Jewish American who had a real turnaround seeing the realities in the West Bank and is one of the leading spokespersons in churches as well as synagogues. And he came home one day, he tells it, he said, his wife, who we've also met, she said, "Mark, are you becoming a Christian?" He says, "No, I'm becoming more Jewish." By which, of course, I think he meant that the real tenets of Judaism is what liberation and social justice are about.
Darrel, what's his name again?
Mark Braverman.
Thank you.
Yeah, a wonderful fellow. And we've had him down here at conferences sometimes. And the leading patron of Sabeel International for years was Bishop Tutu. Well, I'm beginning to finish up here, but I just want to point out that at Friends of Sabeel North America, we've had a very interesting Zoom-in conference back in the beginning of this month with Munther Isaac, whom I already mentioned, the pastor of the Christmas Lutheran Church in Bethlehem. And he gave a most poignant and wide-viewed Christian or Christmas message on Christ under the rubble. If you haven't seen it, I'm sure you can find it. Very powerful. Next Wednesday, our friends at Sabeel locally, or nationally, I should say, on Wednesday at 10 o'clock, our time, is having a Zoomcast on Zionism and anti-Semitism. You might want to look that up too. Well, that's Friends of Sabeel LA and Friends of Sabeel North America. And then we have had an LA chapter almost from the beginning, which has been my privilege to serve on. And now Randy Heinlam and Joe Rose, who've been to our meetings here at ICUJP, are the co-chairs. And just finishing a conference that's been put on by the Presbyterian Church, though they're not Presbyterians, that is just finished yesterday over there. We've had several meetings over the years, the last quarter century, and several conferences more widely. And Joe and Randy, as I say, are on this trip. We've had persons like Don Wagner, Dr. Don Wagner, and also Nadira Shalhoub-Kevorkian, whom I just got an email from just before I got on, who is the chair of the law department, at Hebrew University, though she's a Palestinian, married to an Armenian. Nadira Shalhoub-Kevorkian, one of the great spokespersons of our time, who's written so much on the law angles of what this occupation is about. I encourage you to check her out. We have our next local meeting in March featuring Randy Heinlam and Joe Rose, who I said have just finished being on this witness and solidarity trip to Palestine, sponsored by the Israel-Palestine Mission Network of the Presbyterian Church, of which I've been a part also from the beginning. Our work over the last 20 years is to try to affect our denomination toward a greater sense of peace and justice and awareness in that region. And we've been able to see several resolutions of the National Church passed. We also had an annual conference, which we'll be holding in the Atlanta Decatur area later next month. And it will include a guy named Bob Ross, who is just on the witness trip. And let me just read to you a brief thing about what he has sent to us just the last day or two. This is Bob Ross, who's a professor at Point Park University in Pittsburgh. He says more than 7,000 Palestinians. Now, this is on the West Bank, not Gaza. West Bank and East Jerusalem. More than 7,000 Palestinians have been arrested since October 7th. More than 90% of these arrestees are without charge. He says the police brutality is in unprecedented levels. That these Palestinian prisoners are not granted an attorney, not granted visits by their family members, and almost all are physically assaulted. He also says the Israeli military has tortured 9 Palestinian prisoners to death since 10/7. But let me just say one other thing. We've just finished a Presbyterian IPMN, Israel-Palestine Mission Network trip, on which Randy and Joe have been on. And we hope to hear more about what they're doing, as I say, in the coming weeks. I hope we can have them here on ICUJP. I can mention a number of books that you might be wanting to look in on. Don Wagner's book, Glory to God in the Lowest, because he really gets into it. He was a former Christian Zionist until he began to find out the facts, and has been a real leader in this. I could say much more about him and so forth. And the books I have on Gaza, which are about 10, almost all of them are written by Jews. Marvelous writers who know what's going on there, like Norman Finkelstein and like Ilan Pappé and Noam Chomsky, and especially Sarah Roy of Harvard University, who spent years there in Gaza. Got to read her book. She is an amazing woman. We had her here for a conference some time ago. One of my favorite people in this world, who lost about 100 of her relatives in the Holocaust. So she knows what Holocaust can look like. So that's about all I hope I haven't overextended my time, but that's some of the things I'd like to say to you this morning, and I appreciate your comments and so forth. Okay.
Thank you so much, Darrel. We always learn something from you. And you have a way of communicating that is engaging and accessible. A lot of people on such an important issue have a tendency to hector, to lecture, to speak down to people. Somehow you found a way to expand. Well, I'll hold my thought as hands come up. So
well, thank you, Steve. I've been in good company.
let's go with
Appreciate it.
Rick and then Dave.
Oh, Darrel, thank you very much. Because I'd known obviously of Friends of Sabeel, but I didn't have a chance to understand the depth of what you guys are doing. So that's been very enlightening, and it's been very interesting to get that perspective. For the folks looking at the chat, I put a link to Friends of Sabeel North America. Also, a link to the sermon that Darrel was talking about from Dr. Munther Isaac, Reverend Dr. Munther Isaac, Born Under the Rubble. So you have those available. I would say maybe one thing to talk about is if people want to be more involved with Friends of Sabeel, if there's any way that people can find out more information about the group or what you guys are doing locally, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I think Randy Heinlein, who's over in, I think, in Amman, Jordan now after this trip, is our co-chair, and his wife, Doni, is on here. Do you see that? It just came on my screen from, oh, no, that's Don Smith. But Doni, I think, is on this Zoomcast.
She is.
Yeah, she is. Yeah, and she's been a great asset to the group too. So both Randy and Joe Rose are co-chair, and you can contact me too if you want to. As I mentioned, we're going to have a meeting in March. I'm not sure just when. So when they get back, they can make the report, and we meet regularly. So that's one thing. And you could also check out with Friends of Sabeel North America, which has its headquarters, I guess, somewhere in Colorado. And a lot of things are going on almost every day. Every other day, an article is coming out from Jonathan Katab. And just yesterday, Solidarity with the Suffering, Reflections #5. So since he's been the head of Friends of Sabeel North America, he's had articles coming out almost every week, if not midweek. So you can get a lot of information out of that, and any conferences that may be going on, or any suggested actions that we can take.
Thank you. One technical point, Swanji, when you left the program and come back, you don't get the chat. So Rick, if you can repost the items when you get a moment, then people can get them. Yeah.
Yeah, Crisis and Rebel. Yeah.
Thank you.
He's an
So,
amazing guy. Yeah. Pardon me.
let me go to Dave Clennon and then Carol Francis.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Darrel,
Thank you, Dave.
for all you're doing and all you've been doing over the years. And my question to you, since Friends of Sabeel has many contacts among the Palestinian community in Palestine, as well as the Palestinian community in diaspora, many of us have our ideas. Many white North Americans have ideas about how to solve the so-called Palestinian question. But you're in a position, I think, to tell us something of what the Palestinian people themselves actually hope to achieve with their resistance against the Zionist colonizer, the Zionist oppressor. We hear about the one-state solution, we hear about the two-state solution, but I want you, if you can, to transmit to us the wishes, the aspirations that you have heard and seen among the Palestinian people there and throughout the world.
Well, thank you. There may be some on this Zoomcast who might want to add some things. I'm thinking of Donnie Heinlam as well. Well, the fact that many of them settled for two states after 1967, especially, considering the fact that many of them had been driven out of their lands in what was officially Israel, and before that, Palestine, in what is called now Israel, as distinct from the West Bank. Many of them, including the leadership of Sabeel in Jerusalem, bought in pretty much to the two-state solution. And I remember being in Bethlehem around the late 90s with one of the leading Palestinian guys. We were going up the hill in Bethlehem in this park and grassy area. And that was a wonderful place of picnicking and getting out from the city for the people and their families. Well, it wasn't long before all that was concrete settlement buildings, taking that and the whole periphery practically around Bethlehem into settlement. What I'm getting on to is Sabeel leadership in the with Naim Atik, Reverend Naim Atik, an Episcopalian or Anglican priest who started Friends of Sabeel. I should have mentioned him because he was very key, and he's still on almost every week. And but many of Sabeel said, we believe in the two-state solution, but others are saying, where is this Palestinian state going to happen? So much of its land is being taken daily, daily, daily. Where is it going to be? So that's a big question. Many are believing that we need to have one state with equality for both Israelis and Palestinians. But that's awfully hard, especially with Netanyahu saying that's never going to happen. And so that's a real question. How do you get the people who are on top and who don't think much about Palestinians except they are terrorists, in quote, how do you get them to realize that there's got to be a unity of power, and it's meant for both people? And this is a major issue. And of course, Netanyahu showing just 3 weeks before October 7th, Netanyahu showing to the United Nations a map of the Middle East, and it was all Israel there, not a single word about West Bank or Gaza. So that's been his vision for all time. And that's something of the story behind Gaza right now. So it's sort of a long roundabout answer saying, we know what one side, at least the leadership wants, they want it all. They've always wanted it all. There are some in the Israeli community who are more for two states. And right now, the impossibility almost of a second state seems to be glaring, because even those what would be the second state, as I mentioned from this report by this guy, Bob Ross, the arrests and the beatings and the killings, there's been something like 400 killings of Palestinians on the West Bank, not in Gaza, since October 7th. So I don't have an answer that's definitive. I'm not sure anybody has a definite answer. I think most of them wish the United Nations would come up with really standing by what they've been saying all these years. And of course, the UN Security Council has asked for stopping the thing on Gaza 3 times, including this last week. U.S. said "niet," and I don't know. It has been so heartbreaking, to say the least, about what's happening there. I don't know if I've directly answered your question, because I'm not sure anybody's got a definitive answer, unless you want to go by international law.
Thank you.
Well, Darrel, thank you. Steve, can I just make one last point? There is a book that was published very recently. It looks like Darrel knows about it, and maybe he would comment about it, because it goes to the question that I asked, which is, what do the Palestinian people want? And I don't know if I haven't had time to read the book yet, but
can you say the title and the author?
The name of the book is Our Vision for Liberation, Our Vision for Liberation. And it's a compilation of essays and statements by Palestinians, which was compiled by Ramzi Baroud and the Israeli historian Ilan Pappé.
I think.
Do you want to comment on that, Darrel?
Well, Ramzi Baroud has been speaking, writing out for the last 10 or 15 years. I think he was once stationed, I don't know if he still is, up in the Santa Barbara area. And I remember he was coming down to the LA area for an annual dinner. But he's on quite regularly. I think you can get him on Counterpunch. And I wanted to say Counterpunch and also Common Dreams are 2 websites to keep your eye on. And let me mention a third, called Palestine Portal. And Palestine Portal, which Mark Braverman, whom I mentioned, has a lot of influence on, has articles every day that are right up to date, many of them taken from the Al Jazeera website in Amman or wherever they are. But and by the way, the Al Jazeera people have been so brave. I think most of you may know that something like, what, 125 journalists have been killed in Gaza, more than almost any since the beginning of the recorded time. In the I don't. It's absolutely horrid, including some with their families. What do they not want people to see and hear? Those who kill them so courageously. I also might mention, we're talking about books. Let me just mention two or three. Naeem Atik, who is the founder of Sabeel, has recently come out called Call and Commitment. Call and Commitment, a journey of faith from Nakba, the experience of Palestinians in 48, to Palestinian liberation theology. And then the professor at Columbia University, Rashid Khalidi, The 100 Years War on Palestine, New York Times bestseller. And he's an outstanding voice for the reality of things over there. And then one last book of my dear friend Don Wagner, Glory to God in the Lowest, Journeys to an Unholy Land.
Darrel,
Yeah.
let me interrupt for 1 second.
Yeah.
You have blurred your background and your foreground as I normally do. So we can't see the titles or we can't see the covers of the books. They're all a blur.
Okay. Can you see it from this distance?
No.
Okay. Well, anyway, we got to start meeting personally.
I'll put the titles and authors in the chat
Thank you.
so that you guys can take a look at those.
And that's just some of them. And the books on Gaza are really well worth looking at, especially the one by Sarah Roy of Harvard. And there's several books. And she just recently came out in a statement back in November about what's going on. I wish I could forward it to you, but you might check her out. She's an amazing woman.
Darrel, let me accept your invitation to bring Donnie Heinlam into this. She just grimaced when I said that. But
To unmute.
okay.
Yay,
First,
Donnie.
welcome. Introduce yourself. And do you have some observations on what you've heard from Darrel so far and some of the questions about what, as far as we can tell, do the Palestinian people want?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Doni Heinlam, married to Randy, and we co-chair the Middle East Ministry at All Saints. Basically, what I hear more and more from our Palestinian friends is they want to live in peace. They want to live in a place where they have equal human rights, where they're recognized as people, with the same rights as everyone else. This has been a very difficult time. Of course, it's been horrific in Gaza, but as many of you were mentioning, in the West Bank, it's been very difficult. Many cities have been on lockdown much of the time of the last 4 months. Some areas are a little bit easier to get in and out of, but friends and villages have been very affected by settlers roaming the streets with guns, with Israeli military incursions. Right after October 7th, schools closed. Those that had been hooked up to the internet during COVID were able to go online, that was in the larger towns and cities. But in the smaller towns, those children have been out of school this whole time. People are shot going to the store, the grocery store, trying to get food. Very difficult. So as Darrel and others were talking about the challenges right now, it's been difficult everywhere. And one of the interesting parts to me is that Palestinians that we know have been much more open to looking at various forms of governance. Many of you realize that there's not a lot of faith in the leadership. I'm not just talking about Israeli leadership, but also Palestinian leadership when it comes to the Palestinian Authority, when it comes to Hamas. There's been a lot of dissatisfaction amongst people. And as many of you also know, there have not been elections in many, many years, either with Hamas in Gaza or with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. So people are looking for leadership that truly leads to freedom, that truly leads to a way to share the land in an equitable way.
Thank you so much. We've got 3 questions and about 20 minutes or so. So short questions, short answers. Let's go to Carol Francis.
Want to briefly say one of the reasons why they don't have leaders, Palestinian leaders out there in front, is they're in Israeli prisons.
Yeah.
And if you could speak very quickly about the dwindling Christian presence. I understand there are fewer and fewer Christians in Palestine. But my main question is that you were speaking of the misuse of the Bible, and I'm hoping you can give clarity on that, because I've heard that Christian Zionists take the apocalypse literally where it wasn't meant to be taken literally. And what it really means, I've never heard. I heard the, how they misuse it, but I've never heard what it actually says that and what it actually means.
Darrel, as you answer that question, I'm turning over the facilitation to Rick at this point. I'm multitasking with a grandchild here at my house. I'll stay in the call and Rick will do the questions and answers from now on.
Thanks, Steve. Good to see you. Thank you so much.
Darrel, did you finish?
Well, I did. I could get into this quite a long time. Let's just say the book of Revelation is quite different than these Christian Zionists make it to be. And you have to read a book by Barbara Rossing, a Lutheran pastor, who really is very clear on that. Apocalypse is only used once in the book, and it's the apocalypse of Jesus Christ, and how it's not about the end times. It's not about a literal thing. They had to write in kind of a mysterious language so that the powers that be did not know what they were talking about, but those who were on the ground did know. So it's not to be taken literally, but very purposely. But unfortunately, these people used a piece of scripture here and a piece of scripture there, or what they think it means, and tie it together. And this is mostly the kind of thing you hear on television or the radio, because that sells.
Yep.
And it's a very detrimental thing to the Palestinians of Palestine.
Yep.
As far as the Palestinian Christians, many are leaving, have been leaving over the years. I guess not because they don't love their land or the people. And it's not because of Muslim pressure. It's, I guess, because maybe they have a better way of being accepted, so to speak, in countries to which they're going. I don't know. But, we are speaking on behalf, we hope, and in accordance with the concerns of the Muslim Christian Muslim Palestinian communities here, as well as the Christian ones. We do a lot of things together, but I don't have anything much more to add than that. Maybe Donnie does.
Oh, I did want to add the name of the book. Barbara Rossing wrote The Rapture Exposed, the
Thank you.
message of hope in the book of Revelation. I've heard her as a speaker at a conference, and it was wonderful and very different view than you might otherwise hear about the book of Revelation. Very helpful.
Yeah, she was featured on an NBC or CBS morning news program because of that book some years ago.
Mhm.
Yep.
That's great. I'll put the link in the chat when I can get used to multitasking here, but in the interim,
Now I don't feel so bad, Rick.
yeah. In the interim, Richard Bunce, if you had a question.
Yeah, Darrel, I'm wondering how you're seeing the long-term impact on Israel's well-being and even survival as a result of all this. It seems like right now, it seems like Israel's in the driver's seat, and yet the BDS movement seems to be growing. The Israeli economy is suffering. The U.S. and Israel are becoming more and more isolated. Demonstrations all over the world. The court challenge being brought by South Africa, the global East and global South generally are absolutely not in favor of all of this. And even the White House staff is trying to get Biden to be a little less tone deaf. On and on it goes. How do you see the future of Israel in light of all of this?
Well, it's hard to say. Depends, I guess, how much to the right so much more of the population will go to. It seemed like it was promising before October 7th when you had all these hundreds of thousands of demonstrations against Netanyahu and presumably his cohorts who are but now it seemed like so much of Israeli society, because of war, has been galvanized. And I don't know. There are some scholars who've said that they feel that Israel is really on the way down. We do not want to see the Israeli people on the way down. I think the Palestinians, for the most part, don't want to see that either. But there's got to be some way that the land can be shared equitably and nobody else's water and land can be taken, and trees. I don't have a direct answer about that right now. Maybe somebody else has a better one, but things look sort of, in effect, bleak, but maybe when it's darkest, something can come out. The amazing thing is that so much more of the world is really against what Israel's been doing, except us, our country and our special allies over in Europe.
Yeah.
There's hope maybe at the at the UN Security Council. Almost every time it's 15-1.
Mm-hmm.
And pretty soon somebody's got to figure out how come they don't know anything like we do. I think people have got to start questioning, why do we feel that we always have the right answer? And you got to realize how much money, I mean, I hate to bring this up in a way, how much money is involved in people getting elected. It was a Republican Congressman, Paul Hopkins, I guess it was, from Illinois, who wrote a book about how the Zionist lobby and the money it imposes is a real threat. I think AOC and some of the other more progressive Democrats have been targeted with billions of dollars of campaign funding to get them unelected. You know, so money has an awful lot to do with that, and with how U.S. sees it, and then how U.S. may affect Israeli policy.
Well, there's something, if I may, there's something so irrational at work, and the news of decapitated babies, as an example, during the October 7th. You know, I think just about everybody believes that there was wholehearted decapitation of children and babies and killing of families in front of their children and all of that. And it goes beyond the realm of reason, and it becomes a panicky and ferocious response. Do you see any way of mitigating that? Is there some new truth to be thrown on the thing about the babies and all of that? Do you have any sense of that?
Well, I think there have been quite a few articles out about really questioning that veracity.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to remember the name of the guy who runs. Anyway, that is the very fact that it got into the New York Times or other papers does not necessarily make it true, and it could happen. I'm not saying that. What is happening to babies in Palestine is another question too.
Right.
But I'm sure that, you know, no one wants to justify anything harmful that Hamas has done. We also got to realize these people have been cooped up for 17 years. I don't know, I don't know how any of us would handle it. I don't know if Israelis who were cooped up 17 years would have acted any differently. That doesn't justify anything, but I think there have been serious questions about the veracity of those reports. That's all I could say. I can't imagine it couldn't be true. It could be true, but you got to find out where the source came from. There's always seemed, anyway. Yeah, a lot of news agencies have to report through Jerusalem. I remember walking down the street with a couple of journalists, women journalists in Ramallah several years ago, and said, well, everything we write's got to go through the Jerusalem office, which is the Israeli office. So, to what degree these strictures have on what's really happening, I don't know. But anyway, killing or maiming any child is reprehensible, and if Hamas did that, shame on them. I just question the veracity of the reports sometimes, because when you want to get starting a war, you start really trying to pull out all kinds of accusations to justify it. I'm not saying it isn't true, but I think we need to really question it. Jeremy Cahill, I think is his name, who's written a good article on some of this. And it's not all I could say about that. Yeah. Meanwhile, babies get bombed to pieces in Gaza.
Yeah, right.
I don't know what's the difference sometimes. That's intentional too, from those courageous bombers. Yeah.
Yeah.
When you get 88,000 tons of bombs dropped on Gaza, a lot of babies are going to get killed too. So, I mean, one does not justify the other, but I think we need to see the widest picture here. I hope that somewhat answers you. I'm not sure I have any definitive answer, except to question a lot that comes out from various sources.
The latest I've gotten on it is that regarding the babies is that there is some truth to it, but it's been grossly exaggerated.
Yeah.
Rebecca, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Darrel.
Thank you.
You taught me more about Sabeel. I've been attending the Thursday online service since the lament in October. I got an invitation to attend the lament in October. I've been attending it weekly ever since. And like Donnie said, she talked about some of the the IOF excursions into Jerusalem, like some of the staff has shared their experiences with, these encounters with them, like searching their phones for their social media posts. And it's a very, it's just a very tense situation. And I learned more on these Thursday meetings about the situation in the Armenian quarter, where the settlers are trying to take away the land from the Armenian population there. And you don't hear about this in mainstream media. And Democracy Now! Has done great coverage, but very little on that. So my question is, though, what is a common theme at this Thursday meeting is, and Reverend Atik brings up, is why don't the churches, speak up more and call for a ceasefire? And he asks almost every week, what has the Archbishop of Canterbury said? And somebody reports on it, and I think the report yesterday was he said it would not be useful. And I know that, the Pope has spoken out and called for a ceasefire, and he's used very strong language too when a couple of worshipers were shot in a church, and I think it was the West Bank or Jerusalem, and he called them snipers and he called them terrorists, but we don't hear from the churches. And so what can we do, ICUJP, or as individuals, to get our churches to speak up and call for a ceasefire? Personally, my church, Unity, they were founded by peace activists, have not called for a ceasefire, and I can't get their attention. What are your suggestions?
Well, I know the church I go to in Pasadena hasn't spoken out from the pulpit, except maybe once when we had one of the members come back from such a trip. I was given the opportunity to have a workshop right after church on one Sunday morning in November 12th that really was quite well attended. And over the years they've been able to have that, but they don't say much else. And it's hard to know how to persuade ministers in their church to speak out on these things. But they've got to. And I know Doni probably has something to say about her church, because they do have very vibrant ministry, lay people there on this issue.
One thing I would mention is for a lot of churches, I can't speak to other places of worship really, but for a lot of churches, it's possible to get things in the prayers of the people. Sometimes there are venues that you can present requests to be prayed for publicly, which just about every church welcomes in one way or another. We were able to have an art installation, shall we call it, at All Saints. It was on our church lawn. One of the staff members came up with the idea of having flags as it was called Shoes for Ceasefire. That's what it was called. And people were encouraged to bring children's shoes, and then each Sunday to place them by a flag on the lawn, and maybe say a prayer as they prayer for peace as they placed their shoes by the flag. We had that up for 2.5 months out on our church lawn. And because we're right across from City Hall, we had tourists who would come by and say, "What is this?" And they tried to put up some signage to help explain that this was mourning for the children lost on October 7th and the succeeding days in Gaza. However, we found out through the grapevine that not all staff was in favor of it. Many had questions about it, but it still went ahead. And I think there are many throughout this group and other groups who have been involved in protests. There are, generally many protests every week in LA somewhere or in Santa Monica. Pasadena has had a weekly vigil in front of Judy Chu's office. And though she has at least spoken out for ceasefire, but has sort of stopped with that statement. And people are trying to find ways, small and large, to encourage their individual congregation as well as their national church or national governing body of their mosque or a synagogue to speak out. It can be a tough slog for all of us, but there, I would say, start small and tangible, and creative ways can be very helpful. I would say start with prayers, because that's maybe the easiest. In one sense, it's the easiest and the hardest thing to do. Once you pray about it, action needs to follow.
Yes,
That's so
agreed.
true.
So, yeah.
But I would say prayer is literally a first step. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, in speaking and struggling with Dr. Martin Luther King, said, pray with your feet, meaning get out, join the marches, join the vigils. And I'm going to put in one plug right now for ICUJP. This program is recorded. These programs are posted on the ICUJP.org website. Please, in a few days, once it's posted, forward this very conversation to your friends, your family, parishioners, congregants, some who either need to be reinforced in what we're talking about or may need to hear it for the first time, along with all of the resources that we're sharing today. That's one key step that we encourage. Rick?
So on the front page of the ICUJP website, you'll see some slides, and one of them is a direct link to the YouTube videos that we've done so far on the Israeli-Palestine conflict. So,
Rick, could I add too? The Los Angeles Times, whose sports section has gotten worse, according to me. But nevertheless, LA Times has put out quite a few articles on this issue, some from Palestinians themselves in Gaza. They try to keep a balance, but I tell you, it's much more balanced than anything that we've read before in most papers. And they've already come out twice calling for a ceasefire in their lead editorial. So I think they need to be supported at this point too. Thank you.
We probably have time for one more round of questions. A little fair warning, Darrel. You remember we close all our programs after our circle with a prayer to send us off for the week ahead. Okay. Would you begin to think about, in your own words or in any scriptural reference you choose, to do that for us at the end?
Thank you. I feel honored. Thank you.
All right. So let's turn back to Dave Clennon. Go right ahead.
Thanks, Steve. I want to address the question of alleged atrocities during Operation Al-Aqsa Flood. One of the first so-called news information communication claimed that 40 Israeli babies had been decapitated by Palestinians. That rumor, that disinformation was first disseminated by an IDF soldier who was also a settler in the West Bank. I subscribed to Haaretz newspaper in Israel, and they have published a list with photographs when they were available, a list of all the people who were killed, all the Israelis who or visitors to Israel who were killed in the operation. And I found, as I went through the 900, at that point, I think there were about 1,100 victims pictured and listed and captioned. I found one 10-month-old baby and one 4-year-old child in that entire list. And Haaretz did not say how those children were killed. So that's number one. Number two, the New York Times recently published a long article suggesting that Hamas, or the Al-Qassam Brigade, used sexual violence as a weapon of war. I read the article. The article was debunked by Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate, and I believe many others. I read the article myself, and I found it empty of any real evidence of sexual violence committed by members of the Al-Qassam Brigade. Totally unconvincing, and other people who have more journalistic credit than I do have debunked it. So the allegations of atrocities on October 7th, some of them may be true, but they are also a weapon of war, and they have been a very effective weapon of war, mostly disinformation, mostly lies, but they have been faithfully transmitted by the Western media, and they serve that number of alleged atrocities, as small as it is in proportion, has served as a justification for what Israel is doing. Thank you. And I welcome any comments from Dick, Bunce, or Darrel.
That squares with what I'm hearing. Yeah.
Me too.
Let's take the final question from Ignacio. Thank you, Dave.
Well, actually, it's a comment, or maybe a response to what we just heard about the lies. Just perusing the history of the United States of America and the official pronouncements that led to wars ought to force, or ought to persuade us all to always doubt the official story. 1846, Mexico is doing this and all that. Abraham Lincoln says, show us. The president never provided any information about what Mexico was doing, and went to war. More recently, the Gulf of Tonkin issue, the weapons of mass destruction, on and on and on. 9/11. That's why I immediately, 9/11, I went to doubt the official story. And when you read 11 books by David Griffin, then you know that the official story was an absolute lie, and it still is an absolute lie. So, number one, always doubt the official positions.
Thank you. If you two guys will take your hands down so we know where we stand. I'm going to use that as a hook to tell you that ICUJP's defense of Julian Assange is a major pillar of our work.
Yes.
This week, there were appellate hearings in the High Court to decide whether or not Julian can fully argue the gravity of the reasons why he should not be extradited. There's a lot of information available on this. There's yesterday a very good article in Truth Dig that was comprehensive in that respect. So it's all out there. What I'm really mentioning today is it's similar to everything else we talk about. You've got to contact Merrick Garland at the Department of Justice, the White House, and your own elected officials. Letters are moving through Congress with signers to call for that persecution of Julian Assange and freedom of press to be stopped. So I just want to highlight that today. And Carol Francis, are you waving your hand? You're on.
There we go. Yeah, and I put in the chat earlier that the websites, once an Instagram and once a Twitter, for the LA for Julian Assange. So if you want to know what you can do, where to show up when the next event happens, we just did a banner drop all over the world. There were these banner drops all over the United States and the rest of the world, and card signing to Congress people. So if you want to get involved, there's a website in the chat. It's Instagram or it's Twitter. And if you don't have, you don't need to have an account there to go to the site, but you can tell it's run by young people because there's no website.
Thank you. Anthony.
Yes, we're having a housing justice forum this Sunday from 3:30 to 6. It's going to be in person and online, a hybrid meeting. And it's to launch a new book called Gone for Good, Negotiating the Wave of Church Transitions. It's a book in which Jill, my wife, has a chapter about the Congregational Land Committee and the efforts to help churches that want to build affordable housing on their land. Anyway, it's an opportunity to go to the office of Bill Burns, who is he's the one who does a lot of the design work for building churches on building affordable housing on church land. That's this Sunday from 3:30 to 6, and I'll put the information in the chat.
Thank you, Anthony. This is the time for other announcements from any affiliated organizations or groups, anything you want to lift up this coming weekend and the following week. While people are thinking about that, anything we can tell our audience, Rick, about next Friday? I know we have a lot of things in the works.
Yes. So next week, and it's a very timely program, we're having folks from Drop LWOP, Life Without Possibility of Parole. So it's a very important program. So I hope all of you who came today can join us, tell your friends. There is a link tree that I put in the chat too, which has information on our website, things that are happening, writings and documentaries of previous speakers. So I hope you guys can get a chance to peruse that as well.
Well, as we close, I'm going to turn it back to Darrel for a few words.
I hope you'll join me in prayer. O God, whose love is for all people, who cares about those whom we tend not to care for, who sent Isaiah and Jesus to talk about good news to the poor and release to the captives, helping the blind to see in more ways than one. Thank you for this time together. We pray for the people we've been talking about today. Pray for those of us and people we know that we need to be more open-minded and open-voiced about this as well. Pray for Steve's daughter's friend, Jed, and his cancer treatment, that it may go well for him and may give comfort to her and to him and his family. For Randy and his 9-day trip to see families, friends, keep him safe and wise. Be with those who grieve yet over these kids who have been killed the last couple of weeks. And our hearts ache, O Lord, for what is happening in Gaza. Pray that those powers that be may stop and reverse what they are doing. We know that all of us have taints in our systems and our own ways of looking at things, but help us to see the truth as you see it. That all are to be loved and none are to be dismissed or killed. Thank you for the ministry of this ICUJP over the years, the faithfulness of those who are here and could be here over these years. Guide each one here today into what we go into in this coming week. That it may be representative of your purpose and love for this or other parts of the world that you have so loved. Amen.